I am René Romero Schuler, and I'm a painter and sculptor based in Monterey, California. I just had a total meltdown one day working on a painting and just not connecting with it and not feeling like it was good enough. And I needed to, go inside the house and take care of Ian or whatever. And I just had a bad day in the studio or in the garage as it was. But I took all the paint off my palette and just scraped it all over the painting. And, just in anger. It was pure anger.
Hello and welcome to Art, the podcast where we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 3, Episode 4. My guest this week is the American painter and sculptor René Romero Schuler, who, in her words, creates powerful images that speak to the complexities of the human condition and the spirit that connects all human beings. René did not have any formal art training, but since a small child felt that she was always meant to be an artist. She endured a difficult childhood, and those real-life challenges are imbued in her work, illustrating her appreciation for the struggles and triumphs of humanity. René was born in Chicago in 1968 to parents Marianne, a retired nurse, and Rocky, who René describes as a bit of an enigma, was always in sales. René and her sisters grew up in Chicago, although she spent a year and a half in Quito with her grandparents. By the time she reached her teenage years, her home life was becoming difficult, with a troubled relationship with her mother and an intrusive fear of her father. At the age of 14, René ran away from home and lived rough, pulling on all her resources and determination. She eventually found work as an artist, painting murals in commercial properties. When she was 17, René moved into her own apartment and worked a variety of jobs, from waitressing to bartending. By collaborating with a variety of artists around Chicago, René was gradually becoming a full-time artist with her own studio and plenty of commissions. In 1999, she met her future husband, and for a while the couple lived in New York before René was drawn back to Chicago to focus on her art. It was here that she was able to reconnect with her contacts in art galleries and establish herself as a professional artist. René is now represented by galleries across the US, Canada, and Europe. She has had major exhibitions throughout the US, Europe, and Asia, and has work included in the permanent collections of numerous museums and institutions. René now lives in Monterey, California with her husband Rick and two sons, Ian and Owen. René, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking time to do this.
Thank you for having me.
Are you a big podcast fan?
I'm not. I tend to listen to music more than podcasts and, occasionally listening to books on Audible and that sort of thing. I like stories more than reality, I suppose. I would say I listen to those more, but I've listened to some podcasts, yours included, and I like them. I like them very much.
Yeah. But you prefer to have the music accompanying when you work. So do you always have music?
Pretty much, yeah. It's either that or silence, I suppose. Yeah.
I know for myself, if I play opera, for example, I am that much more physical. I'm wondering what it does to you.
I kind of use the music to hold me in a time and space. So I sort of start the morning with a bit of meditation, and that helps me to just tap into my energy and close out all the fluff that's going on in my mind. And once I zero in on that energy, I start mixing a color, and that's usually going to be the background for whatever I'm going to work on that day. And that, it'll sort of drive me to a story, usually something from my own life, my past or whatever. And then, a song will often come to me. And so I'll kind of create a playlist from there, and it helps to sort of hold my energy, steady.
And you'll stay with that genre of music then throughout that session in the studio?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And are you a musician yourself? Do you play anything? Do you sing?
Guitar, but I know some chords. I'm not very good.
Are you a private singer then?
I love to sing. My husband usually just makes fun of me if I sing too loud, though. So, yeah, so maybe I'm not as good as I think I am.
We're all a star in our own car, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yes.
And you have two boys as well as your husband, Rick. You have two boys, Ian and Owen, and they're of an age, probably they feel very particular about what they listen to in the car. So if you're out as a family, who gets to choose what's playing in the car?
Oh, Ian is the alpha in the family. He's always the boss.
And he's the older of the two boys.
Yeah. And interestingly though, they both love music. I think Owen loves music even more. And yeah, I happen to like pretty much any genre. So I can relate really well to both boys when they put on their playlists. But I think Owen and I are a little bit more alike in the style of music that we like.
And how about your husband, Rick? Does he have a say in this, in the playlist?
He wants to, but if Ian's around, it's hard for anyone. But but yeah, Rick has his own. He likes a lot of classic rock, and he tends to like a lot of newer stuff, like what I like as well too.
And both of your sons are artistic as well, you told me. So where did they get that from? Your mum was also, and you have an uncle that was artistic. Tell me about the art in the family.
Well, yeah, my mom, when we were little, she painted murals on our walls, and those were really special. And, she's clearly very talented, and she's always loved arts and crafts and that sort of thing. And I had an uncle who's just a few years older than me, but he was a great artist. And when I was really little, he used to teach me how to draw. And he probably influenced me even more. And I don't know, from such a young age, I just knew I was an artist. So I'm thinking my Uncle Nelson probably had the most influence on that.
So, we go back right to the beginning to tell your story. Now, yours started in Chicago. You were born in 1968 in Chicago. Tell me about your very earliest memories.
Oh, gosh. My earliest memories. Well, Chicago was, very different back in the late 60s. We had an apartment, and we lived upstairs from my grandparents, who are from Ecuador. Or were from Ecuador. They've passed, but my grandfather worked for Standard Oil, and I think he was an accountant. And that's what brought my father to the United States, and how he met my mom. But anyway, my parents were still teenagers when they had my older sister and me. And so my mom's parents were taking care of my older sister, Gina. And my dad's parents were taking care of me. So when my grandfather got transferred back to Quito, they took me with them. So I think at that time I was 4.5, maybe 5 years old when they took me to Ecuador. And yeah, I was already speaking Spanish, so that was pretty seamless for me. And I went to school in Ecuador.
So your Spanish, then, you learnt from your grandparents?
Mm-hmm.
And did your mother, Marianne, she was a nurse, retired now, of course, but did she speak Spanish?
No, she didn't. And my father didn't want Spanish spoken in the house. He only, this is very common, I think, among immigrants or first generation immigrants, but, they just want to seem American. They want to, yeah, they sort of deny their culture a little bit. And I think that's how my dad was. He's kind of come full circle with it now. But yeah, back then, so when I came back from Ecuador, I was in second grade and, I was not allowed to speak Spanish in the house.
And do you speak it with your boys as well? Do you teach them?
I tried to. By the time Ian was 3, he just raised his finger and kind of wagged it back and forth and just said, "Mommy, no." And that was, I was, speaking almost exclusively in Spanish to both of them. And Ian had a little bit longer of that than Owen did. But, I think Rick does not speak any Spanish. And I think when, your kids see you communicating with your spouse in a language, that's the language they're going to stick with. And I think they were like, why are you talking to me like this?
No, understandably. Tell me a little bit about your time in Ecuador then, that you went to school there. So what were your memories? And was it a fun experience? Did you enjoy it?
I think I did enjoy it. My grandparents were wonderful, and the lifestyle, the culture, everything about it was so different. Interesting things that I remember are just, being a girl, it was very clear that I was, that girls are being raised to take care of the men. And, so culturally coming back to the United States and having things be quite different was a bit of a shock and hard to sort of make heads or tails of, when I came back. But that was one thing that I remember is, I need to write, beautifully in cursive, and I need to always, make sure the man of the house is well cared for and, the food's on the table and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was very different coming back to the United States and having my mom working full time and going to school. And, my dad was, an interesting character himself, but, I just grew up differently than my sisters did. And, it was hard to reconcile.
Was your mother teaching you sort of domestic chores, like sewing and cooking and that sort of thing, things that you expected to apply, in such a patriarchy?
Teaching? No, my mom did not. She was very busy. She, like I said, she was working full time as a nurse. Her hours, her shift would change. Sometimes she worked at night, overnight, sometimes during the day. And then she was also still in school, early on. So she was just very busy. And, back then cooking, involved like Swanson TV dinners and, Campbell's soup and, just not good stuff. I, looking back, I don't think I thought she was the greatest cook because she was, probably always in a hurry. And, we pretty much kind of had to fend for ourselves. So I loved TV dinners. Those were great for me. And, but she did cook occasionally. Like, I had some favorite things she used to make, I suppose, but, not too often.
What do you feel that you did learn from your mother then? If you learnt art from your grandparents, what did you learn from your mother?
My mom and I did not have that great of a relationship, so I can't say I learned a lot of things back then. She did teach me how to crochet though. And I still crochet now. Not often, but I love it. And that's a sweet memory. But yeah, we didn't really get along when I grew up. We're close now, but it took a long, long, long time for us to get here. And, that was unfortunate.
Looking back, what do you think were the hurdles for your younger self?
I think both of my parents did the best that they could with the tools that they had. I think they were just really young. And I think it took me a long time to come to terms with that. I think when you have a tough childhood and, things hurt you along the way, I think you tend to point fingers and judge and hold on to a lot of anger and that sort of thing. And it took me a long time to look back on it with some perspective and just accept that, you know, they didn't do anything out of malice. You know, they were just struggling, and, you know, it hurt a lot, but they did the best that they could. So it just, I think once you can get to that point, you're just a much happier person. So I feel pretty good now.
Tell me a little bit more about your father, Rocky. You called him an enigma.
That's because, yeah, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he's, you know, my sister and I kind of joke, we all do really, like nobody ever really knows what he does for a living. You know, he's just, he's got a good heart, and he's a good, kind person now. But yeah, we just don't really know how he gets by.
So he wasn't a 9 to 5 guy then?
You know, when I was really young, he was. He did have jobs back then, and he was in sales. He sold like mainframe computers, you know, for like IBM or something like that. But he didn't really stick with any jobs for that long.
So what kind of things did you do with your dad if you hung out with him? Did you do sport or go on adventures with him?
Gosh, I don't think we ever really hung out with him. I think we kind of hid from him more than anything. Yeah.
Did you fear him?
Oh, yeah.
So that must have been hard.
Yeah, it was tough.
How have you reconciled with that experience now as an adult?
Oh, well, like, you know, like I said, I think, having had kids of my own, I think all of us just bring our own experiences to the table. And, you know, I don't think that that's, I don't think you can make excuses for bad behavior, but I think you bring the tools that you have. And some of that comes from, you know, a dysfunctional place. And I would say that that would be the case for my dad and even for my mom in a lot of ways. And I can say that for myself too, because, you know, I had a lot of trauma and a lot of challenges along the way. And that's what I brought into being a mother myself. And, you know, you can only do the best you can. And sometimes it just comes out all wrong. And I would say, you know, my dad, he had a lot of his own trauma growing up. And he, you know, he drank too much. He, you know, smoked a lot of pot, and he just, well, you know, he wasn't right in the head, and he just kind of took stuff out on people and hurt people. And, you know, I don't think he wasn't a mean person. He didn't, you know, come into the house thinking I'm going to hurt people. You know, he just lost his temper a lot.
And so what was your escape then? Was it school? Was it friends that you could go and play with?
Escaping was tough, but so we moved around a lot, so friends were also a challenge growing up. But you know, by the time I was 8, I started trying to run away from home, and I would usually get found and brought back, and that wasn't very pleasant. Then, you know, going into like junior high and high school, that became more common. And then, you know, I left home pretty early. I just didn't go back.
Did you have anyone you could turn to?
Not really. So I did a lot of wandering. I used to go into art galleries around Chicago, you know, during the day. I got really good at finding places where I could, you know, stay warm or stay cool, depending on the season, and places to sleep. I didn't really tap into shelters or anything like that, but every once in a while I would stay with friends. They would sneak me into their houses, or their parents would let them have me over, or, um, there was one guy who would sneak me into his basement, and I slept under his bed for, probably about 6 months or so. Um, so I think there were only maybe 2 times where I actually slept outside. Um, Other than that, if I needed, uh, like at night, I would look for unlocked cars and I would sleep in the cars and stuff like that. So I was pretty resourceful.
And what ages were you at that time?
Oh gosh. It varied. There were, periods and sometimes I would try to go back home. So anywhere from 14 on. I had my own apartment though by the time I was 17, something like that.
And were your parents looking for you, Renee, during this time?
You know, Not really. I mean, at one point, my mom and my sister did track me down, and I never understood why, like my mom never seemed to want me around. And so I felt like it was pretty ironic. And in the end, I was right. So, yeah, no, I think they were probably glad I was gone. At least I felt that way at the time.
But how about your relationship with your siblings, your two siblings, Gina and Tanya? Tell us about your relationship with them.
Tanya was always the protector. She would try to get between my father and me. Tanya was always very much into trying to hold the family together. And, yeah, she was just, she was very strong, I thought. And, Gina went in a different direction. She, uh, had a lot of struggles of her own. And, all three of us were very close. We were only 20 months apart, Tanya and me. Gina and I are 16 months apart. Um, yeah, so we were very close with one another. Yeah.
And how about now? I know you lost Tanya in 2016. That must have been pretty traumatic too for you.
It was probably the worst thing ever. Yeah.
How did you cope?
It wasn't easy. I think it's something, people say time heals. It really doesn't. It's absolutely not true. Um,
Mm.
Kind of interesting to put that theory to the test. But yeah, losing anyone you love that much, so suddenly and unexpectedly, is something very hard to reconcile with. And, knowing that she took her own life, and, you know, every time I look up at a perfect blue sky, I, I fall apart. I think Tanya should be here. And, it's one of the hardest things to ever conceive of. And, I've been, if anybody was going to do that, I always thought it would be me. And honestly, I thought that my heart should just stop on its own because I was hurting so much. It was so unexpected that it would have been Tanya. And honestly, she did that when she was 45. And, at that point I was like, okay, we've kind of made it, we got past all this stuff, and, now we can live a life. But unfortunately, Tanya's struggles really carried well into, those years. And, but yeah, I thought she was okay. And I didn't realize she wasn't.
Well, especially given that when she was younger, you considered her strong.
Oh, yeah.
And your protector. So,
yeah.
Did she leave family behind, children?
Yeah, she had a daughter, my niece, Kira.
And so with those kind of experiences, they shape us permanently, of course. And as an artist, they influence our art. How do you think those early formative days and the difficult childhood and the trauma have really shaped the course of your art, not specifically pieces, Renee. I'm just thinking about how you decided to make art, your livelihood now, and what particular shape or form that was taking in your mind.
Well, I think that, I needed to make a living. I needed to figure out how I was going to get by. And, I had to drop out of high school because I needed to work. I needed to figure out how to pay my bills and that sort of thing. And the only thing I really felt that I excelled at, in high school was art. It was the only thing I really felt passionate about and enjoyed. And I don't know that I have any true innate skill or, great talent of any kind. I just loved it. And so I had a lot of tenacity. I think I still do. And I just pushed, and I went around and asked companies if they wanted paintings for their offices and that sort of thing. And some of them said yes. And that's how I got my start. I was just out of high school and started doing paintings for companies.
So you were 17 years old then, and you had your own apartment, and this was, paying the rent, I guess. Now you were starting to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, well, that was the career direction I was going in, but I was also waitressing to make ends meet and that sort of thing. So early on, I had to do a few things.
Yes, well, I'm thinking that too. It always goes alongside something else. What were those things apart from waitressing? Give us some examples of the kind of things you were doing to make ends meet.
I waitressed early on. I worked at a record store as well. And then I graduated into being a bartender at nightclubs. And that was great because I made a lot of money back then.
That was, and this was all in Chicago.
Yeah. So, and then, working in the nightclubs and restaurant industry, Chicago, they call it the biggest small town. And it really is. It's a very tight community. So I became pretty well known for doing decorative painting for restaurants and nightclubs around Chicago. So I did some really cool work for some really well-known clubs back then. And so that I was able to stop bartending and waitressing and that sort of thing by the time I was 23 and just exclusively do my art for these clubs and restaurants. And it was fun because I was making a living with a paintbrush in my hand and I certainly couldn't complain, but it was all commission work. So, if they wanted a wall to look like marble, that's what I did. If they wanted a mural that, resembled Caravaggio, whatever, I would do that, so I would create these very heavy theme oriented spaces. And I worked with some really great artists along the way. So even though I don't have a formal, academic education, I would argue I've had the greatest education that money didn't buy. I really worked with some tremendous talent along the way and learned skills that they absolutely do not teach in any colleges that I've been aware of.
You must have developed a confidence then that in your ability and to take the pressure of commissions at a young age then, knowing that, you could produce the goods.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't, back then I would definitely not characterize myself as confident. I don't know if I still, it's not a word I use really. I think I just, early on when I was calling those companies, I was scared to death. I mean, one person said they wanted a wall that looked like malachite. And I was like, well, what is malachite? How am I going to do that? And, so I would go to the Chicago Public Library. I would check out books and I would study all night. I would get, boards and paints and I would just play and try and figure it out. Another person wanted a trompe l'oeil. I was like, what's a trompe l'oeil? What the heck is that? They wanted it to be a garden that they could step into on their lunch break. They wanted the whole wall done like that. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to do that. And, my answer to literally everything anyone said is, yes, absolutely, I can do that. I couldn't do any of it. And so I had to practice and really try to figure it out. And thankfully that worked. And when I really didn't think there was any possible way I was going to be able to nail this, I had other friends that were artists, and I'm like, okay, do you know how to paint like Caravaggio? And I had a friend, David, who's like, yes, absolutely, I can help you with that. And so we'd work together and we'd split the money, and I learned from him, and so I was learning from everybody that I would bring into projects with me. So, I was like the broker. I was finding these jobs for us, and we would do them, and we'd do them together. And we created some amazing things. We did, massive relief sculptures that flanked doorways. We did, walls that were, gosh darn it, I can't remember the term, but we did murals out of plaster, mimicking the Dead Sea Scrolls. We just did anything. It was crazy, the stuff we did. And gilding, we gilded barrel vaulted ceilings that were, 900 square feet.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were tremendously resourceful then.
Yeah.
You were given a job to do, and you darn well found out how you were going to do it.
Yeah, I would say that's the better word. Confident? No. I was like constantly terrified that I was going to fail, but I just kept pushing and, pushing, and trying to figure things out.
Where do you think the turning point came then? Once you established yourself and you were learning in the process how to produce whatever you were asked of, and as you say, intimidated by it because you didn't always have the answers. You had to research them. But at one point, you must have felt, okay, I'm good. This is something I can do, and I have the confidence to do it. Do you remember what that turning point, or is it gradual?
I think it was pretty gradual.
Yeah.
I think I was intimidated by a lot of projects, probably most of them. But, like I said, I'm really, really tenacious. I just keep, pushing myself forward. And I never really left any time for myself to absorb failure. There were a lot of no's along the way. There were a lot of things that challenged me a great deal. And I did have failures, and I did learn from them, but I couldn't allow myself any time to sit and wallow in misery, because there was always a bill to be paid, or, something around the corner. So I just kept going forward.
I would imagine Chicago as a city, and when it comes to art, would have been a pretty tough nut to crack. So your tenacity would have meant everything to your survival. Yeah.
And it was a great city to do what I was doing in. I survived pretty well, pretty quickly. The earlier years were really tough and they've been painful. But by the time I stopped bartending and waitressing, I was pretty solid in what I did. And, you're still, when you're doing those kinds of things, you're working on one project at a time. And so, you have to always hope that there's another project around the corner. And there's that fear that, oh gosh, what if there isn't? Because I wasn't making money hand over fist. I was making enough. That's it, So I don't know, a turning point. I think I felt pretty solid in what I was doing by the time I was 23. I would say, yeah, but, I wasn't doing my own art. I was doing it, kind of just at home and not feeling particularly confident in my own skills, my own, personal vision, and my own connection to any style or method or, anything like that. So I was getting through these jobs, but I was also beating myself up pretty badly along the way because of that.
You mentioned that you work with a lot of notable artists. Give us some names.
Oh, most notable would be Ray Pasica, and he owned a company in Chicago. They did designing and building of restaurants and nightclubs. So, kind of a turnkey sort of a thing. But Ray is, I think, the most talented person I've ever known. There's nothing he can't do. Any type of, style of painting. He exposed me to all the materials that I'm so familiar with, and really how to improvise when you don't have what you need. And that's a really incredible skill that there's no way to learn that unless you're out there doing. And so when we were working together, we worked together for several years. And, I was doing everything from, stick welding I-beams to massive sculptural elements and murals that were enormous, and, using everything from automotive lacquers to epoxy resins and latex paints and whatever, all kinds of things. So that was probably the greatest experience that I had in terms of just learning and learning and learning.
So where were you working out of now? Wasn't just your apartment, was it, if you were using all those materials?
No, let me think. When did I got a studio? Can't remember what years I started having separate locations, and I bought a van, so we could carry all our materials to jobs and that sort of thing. So yeah, I had a separate location. Early on, it was just out of my apartment. And that was at the time when I was working on, just the smaller projects for offices and that sort of thing. But yeah, I had a studio.
How was your social life at that time, Renee? I mean, when you had time, you were obviously working hard in those early years to get established, but did you have any social life? What was that like?
Not much social life. I've never been a big drinker or partier per se. So for me, it was really cool to have those bartending years, because my friends would all come see me, but I was safe behind the bar. I get really nervous in crowds, and I don't do well in I didn't do well in a lot of crowded social situations. And so the bar was a really great way for me to, feel safe and comfortable. And that worked super, super well. Once I stopped bartending, my social life was my work, and I was working 7 days a week, and we'd work really long hours, and we had a great time. So my social life involved the people that worked with me, and that was it. And it seemed fine at the time. I didn't date very much at all, and it just worked.
At what point did you meet your husband, Rick?
I met Rick when I was 30. I had just turned 30, and that was a big turning point.
How did you meet?
He wanted a mural for his loft, and he was working at Bank of America.
Oh, at least that was his excuse, was it?
Well, he didn't know me. He actually, he was working at Bank of America downtown, and there was a restaurant in the main floor of the building. I think it was called Cafe Bocce or something like that. And actually, it was a friend of mine, this guy, Robin Brisker, who did all the painting there. And, Rick really liked it. And he asked, could he get the number of the artist that did the work? And he ended up getting Robin's number. And Robin reached out to me, and he was like, I just don't have time to deal with this, and I don't want to do anything residential. Can you call this guy? And I was like, well, I'm really busy, but yeah, I can get to it in a few weeks. And so 3 weeks later, I called Rick, and we scheduled a time for me to come to his loft. And that was in River North in Chicago. And it was like, I think we scheduled it for like 8 a.m. And so he was, kind of halfway out the door getting ready to go to work, but he just wanted to show me what he wanted done and, get a price and maybe schedule it out. So I went there that morning, and it was pretty instantaneous that we just looked at each other and were like, And so I scheduled the work and I got it done. And then that was that. He was so shy and kind of like awkward. And so a couple weeks afterwards, I was at the gym and I was running on the treadmill. And one of the trainers at the gym came up to me and he's like, "Excuse me, I'm really sorry to bother you, but there's a guy back there that wants me to tell you that you're running wrong." And I was so feisty, and I was like, what? And I look back and it's Rick, and he's got this goofy grin on his face. And I'm like, what the heck? So I went back there and I'm like, what do you mean I run wrong? He's like, "I'm sorry. I just wanted to get your attention so I could tell you that you missed a spot." And I was like, I just looked at him like, okay. I'm like, so we scheduled a time like a few days later, and I scheduled it for like after work. So, like I knew I didn't miss a spot. I was like, he has no idea how to ask me out. So I wore my favorite jeans that night. I went over there and I was like totally just, I don't know what I expected, but sure enough, I got there and he was so shy and awkward. He's like, "Okay, so here's the spot." And there was no spot. "And if you can just do that, I'm going to go to the gym and I'll see you later." And I was like, I just looked at him like, "Do you have any wine?" He's like, and he kind of stopped in his tracks and he's like, "Yeah, I have really good wine." And so he's dressed for the gym, but he got a bottle of wine out, and we proceeded to sit there and just talk for like 3 hours before he ever like kind of even reached over and touched my hand. And the moment he touched my hand, it was like a power surge went through both of us. And it was crazy because he just kind of looked at me and he's like, "We're going to get married." Like,
did he really say that?
Oh yeah. It was like, we just knew. It was so crazy. And so I was like, well, the hot water's not on at my place, so maybe I'll just hang out. And I never left. And we got married 2 years later.
That is a fabulous love story.
Oh, he's the love of my life. He is just,
that's wonderful.
He's the greatest guy on earth.
Because that would be a great pickup line. "I would like you to paint a mural in my bedroom."
Yeah. You could say that to anyone.
Exactly.
It might really suck, but anyway.
Did you ever finish the mural?
Oh, yeah. And then when we moved, so, after we had our first son, we moved to the suburbs, and we actually had the mural taken off the wall, and we brought it with. And we put it on the dining room wall of our house in Lake Forest.
That's fabulous. So tell me how the art was playing out during those early days then after you met Rick.
Well, so early on, not long after I moved in and all of that, Rick ended up leaving Bank of America and took a job with Merrill Lynch in New York. And it was so ironic because, like, as an artist, I was like, oh, I always wanted my art to be in New York. And I don't know, I was still doing the murals and that sort of thing, but I was kind of slowing down with that anyway. So when he took the job, that was when he officially asked me to marry him. And, I think he probably thought I wasn't going to give up my, long running business and livelihood and all those things without being, properly engaged or whatever. I think I would have followed him anywhere. But anyway, we got engaged and I gave my business to my two employees at the time. And so they took over. and I went to New York, and I, I just plummeted. I just did not know what to do at all. It was kind of like then I was hit full on in the face with your art sucks and you have no talent and you're not going to make it here. You don't know anybody. You don't have the connection, on and on. I beat myself up so badly. I ended up in a really, really deep, profound depression. And it was just the greatest irony because I really wanted to be an artist in New York, and I I wasn't. I just wasn't. I couldn't figure out what to do. And so Rick saw that I was really just not doing well. And then he got sent on a project, like, I think it was like South Korea or somewhere. And he was gone for like 3 weeks. And I just sat there, just falling apart. And I'm like, that's it. I have to go back to Chicago. So I left. I went back to Chicago and, just worked on a couple projects, with my old employees and, kind of picked up where I left off a little bit, but even that felt awkward because I was really not the boss, and so that was weird. And anyway, so then Rick left Merrill Lynch, which was like nobody leaves Merrill Lynch, but he came back. He came back to Chicago and, we got married, February of 2001. And, I can't remember the exact timeline of everything, but we came back and, that same year was 9/11. So I've always said he should thank me because, we weren't there in the midst of that, but it was still very traumatic. We obviously knew people that didn't make it from that whole thing. I was also 7 months pregnant by that time. So I was like just a bag of emotions. It was a very, very traumatic experience, at that time. And anyway, so while we were back in Chicago and while I was pregnant, I was working on my paintings, but still kind of feeling like nothing was good enough. And then our son was born and I was very, very excited and just into being a mom and still working on paintings, but, just not really connecting with the work so much. And then we decided to move to the suburbs for schools because schools in the city were just not going to work well for us. So we moved to the suburbs and I was working on paintings and kind of working in the garage and that sort of thing. And I just had a total meltdown one day working on a painting and just not connecting with it and not feeling like it was good enough. And I needed to, go inside the house and take care of Ian or whatever. And I just had a bad day in the studio or in the garage as it was. But I took all the paint off my palette and just scraped it all over the painting and, just in anger. It was pure anger. And when I went back to that painting the following day, I sort of saw a face in it, and the human brains we're wired to see faces, anywhere, clouds, leaves, the sidewalk, whatever, so and no surprise that I could see that. But anyway, I was kind of intrigued and I felt a connection to it in some strange way. And so I just mixed up some more paint and kept the palette knife in my hand because that's what I used to scrape all the paint on there in the first place. And so I started, drawing the face out and it became this sort of primal mask. But as I was painting it, I was absolutely connecting to, I'll just say it was a bad experience from my past. I was connecting to it and it was really wild because I was sort of unraveling the story in, I don't know, it was an interesting way of unraveling the story. It wasn't so provocative, like I needed to splash the canvas or throw blood at it or anything, but it was a big story. And it was all coming through in this face. And after a few hours, I just kind of stood back from that canvas and I still had the palette knife in my hand. And it was sort of like, this is going to so age me, but it made me think of the Fonz in Happy Days when he goes to comb his hair and he doesn't because he's already realizing he's perfect. And I had the palette knife in my hand and I really felt like, I had never felt like I finished a painting before that. And I had the palette knife ready to, keep going and do what needed to be done. And I was like, nothing needs to be done. And I pretty much just collapsed right there and then and just bawled my eyes out. And I was like, it's done. And it's good. And I knew it was good. And it felt like there was a string connecting my absolute heart to that canvas. And it was just incredible. And what was even, I think the most incredible element of it was as dark as that story was that I was tapping into and as cathartic as that experience was of sort of unraveling it, sort of telling that story through the paint. That painting, even though it was kind of primal and all of that, it was a good, happy painting because I felt so good having gotten it out. And so I felt like it was a very positive, beautiful painting. And so anyway, I felt super, super great and super happy and super positive. And I proceeded for the next year to do 39 more paintings. And so, like I said, I had been, as a young teenager, I used to hang out in all the art galleries downtown. And so they all knew me and I'd shown them my paintings along the way. And, they're like, you're a sweet kid, keep at it. You'll get there, that sort of thing. And, anyway, I called, one of my favorite art dealers back then was, a guy named Roy Boyd, and he had a gallery in River North on Wells. And he was always so kind to me, but also very honest and, blunt. And anyway, he was my first call because I always wanted to be in an art gallery, And I called Roy and I'm like, I think I'm onto something. He had always told me, do 20 paintings and then talk to me, and I was like, 20 paintings? I can't do 20 paintings. Well, I did 40. So I was ready and I showed them to Roy and he's like, you are on to something. They are good. Like, but I can't show them. And I was like, in my mind, I stopped at, you are good. And, so I didn't mind the no, it hurt, but I was like, well, why? And he said, they're too dark. They're, I can't show these to my clients. And I'm like, dark? Like, but they're not. They're actually not. They're very happy, very positive. They're, this catharsis for me. They're healing. They're beautiful. And he's like, I hear you and I respect that, but this is not for my gallery. And so from there, I didn't stop, trying. I kept putting them out there and fairly soon, it didn't even take that long. There was a gallery in Chicago called ARC, and it was actually a co-op gallery, but I didn't care. If I was going to get a break, I was getting a break. And so I did a show at that gallery and, it sold out. So from there, it just kept going. I just kept, doing what I did. And I think that show might have still been up. But it had sold out. I had, some other paintings left at the studio and, Rick's parents used to go to Palm Beach for the winters. And I think, while that show was up, we went down to Palm Beach over Christmas and we went into a gallery on Worth Avenue and had the boys with us, and we were just looking at the art, and the boys were banging on paintings, doing what they do. And the art dealer there was really nice. And she actually encouraged them to touch the paintings. And I was like, wow, that's different. And I liked that. And so I was just looking at a painting, and Rick started talking to her about how I'm an artist and that she should look at my website. And I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh, I don't know how that's going to go. And she just looked like, okay, if they're going to buy something, I'll do it. So she just kind of pulled it up on her computer sort of passively. I could see her face. And then I saw her face change, and she was sort of kind of glued to the screen. And she just kind of looked up at us, and she goes, "Where do you guys live?" And Rick said, "We live in Lake Forest in Chicago." And she said, "I'm going to book a flight." And she booked a flight while we were still there in the gallery. And she flew up to Chicago, came to the studio. She selected, I want to say it was like 18 pieces. And she had them all created and sent down there. And that was the first true gallery to represent me. And so that was kind of mind blowing. And then soon after that, I can't remember the exact order of things, but then I built a studio behind our house. So I was working back there, and somehow the art buyer for Neiman Marcus group got my information. They flew someone up from Dallas, and they came, checked out the studio, and they commissioned 2 pieces for their Michigan Avenue store. And they were big. They were each 60 by 60 inches. So I did those pieces. So I was probably on the very tail end of something with Neiman Marcus. Neiman Marcus Group historically was known for their art collection. They actually published many books for their art collection. So this was sort of a big deal. Unfortunately, this is right when shopping trends were changing and people were shopping more online and all of that. So I don't think I've ever made it into any published books. The paintings are still there in their Michigan Avenue store, but I think, so many retailers are just going away. Macy's is gone, Marshall Field's is gone, Barney's is gone. All these, they're all going away. So the good news was it was a really great commission, and it's a prominent location, and they were at one time very well known for it. So that was kind of a neat thing. And then let's see. So the gallery in Palm Beach, it turns out they were sharing my art with another gallery. And I found that out in kind of a weird way. Somebody was interested in a piece, and I called the gallery to check on it. And she's like, "Well, it's not here." And I was like, "What do you mean it's not here? Is it sold?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, "Well, where is it?" And she told me, and I'm like, "Well, that seems very strange to me. Like, why would that be happening?" And so her practices ended up being a little uncomfortable for me. And so I ended up pulling out of her gallery, but I called the gallery that she was sharing my work with. And, she was like, "I am so glad you called me, because we've been selling the heck out of your work, and, we'd love to take you on." And so that's a gallery that I'm still with now. And she's got 4 locations in Southeast Florida, and she's just a huge operation down there. So it's just been, one after another. I probably now get contacted by, I don't know, it sounds boastful, but I get contacted by galleries who want to represent me. So it's pretty cool.
That is very cool. What a success story. And I'm wondering at what point you set on your style, René, because you were doing those paintings when you had that light bulb moment. You developed a style that was working there. But now, how did that, the change in your style and your preference now, bring you to where you are today?
Well, that's actually a really good question. It sort of evolved from those paintings that I thought were so personal. They were so deeply, deeply personal and so autobiographical. They were tapping into these stories that I needed to work through. And mind you, I've had a ton of therapy over the years. I've been treated extensively for PTSD, and I've been through a lot, so I know what therapy is like. But I would tell you, I got so much more out of working on these pieces. It was just no holds barred, just laying it out there and working through it. And it was this incredible mental exercise. And as I got through those 40 pieces, they were changing, and by the end, like when you've had a lot of psychotherapy, a lot of times along the way, they're like, let's do a group session. And I was like, absolutely not. Nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody can relate to what I've been through. I want no part of empathizing with somebody else's stupid story or, whatever. I had such intensity around that idea. I could not do it. I just couldn't. And what was really interesting as I was working through these was I was unraveling all these stories. I was unraveling myself. And I found that I was able to start hearing other people's stories. I was able to empathize and take on other people's pain and energy. And I just, I don't know, it started transforming the work. And so by the time I was done with those pieces, they weren't just these masks. They were becoming these full figures, these, more confident beings, and it sort of portraying myself at their core, but becoming a little bit of everyone. And it was, so it just sort of came from there.
And now, do you feel you have a clear pathway of where your art is and where it might be going? Or do you still feel that you're evolving and it might change direction at any time, depending on where you're at personally?
Well, I would say any artist would tell you that, the work could evolve at any time. I think the work does evolve. It constantly evolves and changes as I go. I don't feel any desire to push it in any direction. I don't feel the need to, change what I do in any way. I don't, somebody asked me once, like, are you always going to paint these girls? Yeah, what's wrong with painting these girls? I like these girls. These girls tell stories. They balance me. I love them. They're my army of champions. And this is what I do. This is what I'm known for. And I connect with it. So I think if at any point in the course of, my lifetime, if that changes, I'm still an artist. I'm going to do what I'm driven to do. But, there was another thing. So back in the 80s, I used to always ask people, how did you get your art into, how do you, where's Larry Gagosian? I need to show him something, whatever. I was really trying to figure out what's the way in, right? And there was an artist back then, and I asked him the same question, and he's like, René, be careful what you wish for, because if you have any success in this field, you're going to get pigeonholed into doing the same shit over and over again. And I just looked at him like, God, you're such an asshole. I'm like, I should be so lucky. And, so there's an element of that. Now I sort of get it. I didn't get it back then. If I were to deviate from painting these girls and I started painting girls or dogs or something, people would probably, scratch their heads and be like, what are you doing? I mean, it'd be like, if Picasso started painting flowers, if Rothko started painting figures. I mean, some people might judge and say, oh, it's the same old shit over and over again. But why? Rothko is known for doing the same old shit over and over again. So is Picasso. So, you can do this with Mondrian. You can go and say this about any great artist in history. Any of them. They do the same thing because that is what they do. So why judge? Right? So, the work evolves. We're artists, we're experiencing human beings. And so, yeah, that's going to impact the work and it's going to change over time. I think unless I have some sort of, mental break of some sort, I don't think it's going to be anything dramatic from one day to the next. I think it just evolves.
Where does the satisfaction come in? Is it when you finish a piece, or is it when it's viewed by the public and you get further validation? Where's the ultimate satisfaction?
Oh, I think I just get it from the process. I really do. I think, for me, being in the studio, working with the materials, just the doing is where I get the greatest gratification. The bonus is that I can put these pieces out to the world and ultimately that, people want them and the work sells, but if that didn't happen, I'd probably just be stacking them up outside and giving them away. That's a big part of, by the way, why I have art galleries, because, somebody tells me that they like them. I'm like, here, take it. Please, it's yours. If you like it, you should own this. And that's what I did for a while there. And I'm not good with dealing with money. I don't care about money in that way. I would rather, I really feel like art is a thing that needs to be accessible. If somebody connects with a piece of art, they should have that piece of art. I'm a big believer in that. It's dealing with the financial aspects of what I do is something that I really struggle with. So the art galleries are there to protect me and protect the values of the work and that sort of thing. And that's something that I don't really care to deal with at all. So it's really good that I have them. But at the same time, I wish I could give it away. I wish I could afford to. I wish I, was just, so wealthy that I didn't care, making at least a little money to, buy things that I want or live the lifestyle that I want to have or that sort of thing. But yeah, I really, really think that when somebody has a visceral connection to a piece of art, that they need to find a way to have that piece of art. It's that powerful.
Does it therefore have to be commercial for you, then, your art today?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, no question. I live and breathe what I do. It's been a part of my life since I was 6. I've always known that this is what I want to do. I wrote my parents a letter from Ecuador. The letter said, when I grow up, I want to have my art in an art gallery and museums. I said that. And that I want to drive a Rolls Royce because it has my initials all over it. I was very clear. Yes. I knew what I wanted to do. Yeah. So this has been my path all along. And, it's been a struggle, been an immense struggle, but I just keep going. I just keep doing.
How much of your work is commission?
I have probably a fair amount. I'm always, there isn't really a single month that goes by that I don't have at least one commission. So in the mix. So right now I've got 3 commissions that I need to be working on. So I'll probably get 2 done within the next few weeks. And then I have a really big one that's going to New York City. That'll get done probably next month.
What's your parents' reaction, your siblings' reaction to this now? What does Gina ever buy your art, your parents? I mean, how did your mother feel? Because she obviously wasn't that supportive, and she must be quite surprised at the artist you've turned out to be.
Well, I'll say this, as tough as my childhood might have been, I was always referred to as René the artist. So, in whatever way they knew how, they were supportive of that. That's just who I am. I would never sell a piece of art to my family. Gina has Gina has probably 30 pieces in her house. So she's got so much of my work. And my mom has a few pieces as well. I actually painted a mural in my mom's kitchen. It was a copy of a Manet painting. And so it takes up the whole wall in her kitchen. I did that, I don't know, years ago, probably 20 years ago, something like that. Yeah. So I would never sell to my family, but they love what I do. And I think they're proud of me. And, that feels nice, I guess.
Who's the first person you show your work to? Is it your husband, Rick?
See, no, I show some pieces to Rick. Rick is really great. He knows right away what pieces are going to really do well. And he's got a good eye. So I like when I feel a particular connection to a specific piece, I'll come home, I'll take a picture with my phone and be like, what do you think of this? And he'll be like, yeah, you did it. And so he always knows. And I think I do too. And that's why I show those to him before anyone else. But I show with enough galleries now that, I'm often showing them the work before anything else because they're waiting for pieces.
So what are you looking forward to in 2025?
Well, I started, with the idea that I was going to slow things down for this year. And, I had 2 shows on the calendar and I was going to just kind of, slow my process and, not push so hard. I'm extremely prolific. When I'm in the studio and I am super on, and I paint like mad and I work on my sculptures and it sounds like I'm a production hound, but I just love painting so much and I'm a hustler at my heart, so I just work. I love doing what I do. But I also recognized that I needed to slow myself down. And so I'm trying to find ways of doing that. And so I've been trying to focus more on keeping balance in my life. So I hike a few mornings a week. I work out a couple mornings a week. I actually recently enrolled at Middlebury Institute, which is a really interesting place right here in Monterey. They actually train the military on foreign language studies. And I wanted to, get my Spanish back to where it needs to be. I am conversational now, but I'm not fluent. And I would like to be perfectly seamlessly fluent. And so I enrolled in a semester long course for that. So I'm trying to balance out my studio time, but sure as anything, as it seems to happen every single year that I go into saying, I'm going to go easy this year. I work with a lot of galleries and, they're all like, hey, can you do a show in July? Yes. I say yes to everything. It's always been my nature. So I try to figure everything out and, I figure out the balancing elements along the way. So, I've got a lot more than just the 2 shows. I have a lot of travel this year. And so, my task is just to find the balance.
Well, clearly there has been a bumpy road in your past, René, but it sounds as if you're in a good place now. Are you happy?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I'm living the dream. I'm living the dream of making a really good living as an artist. And I could say that for 30 years now, I've been making a really good living just as an artist. And not a lot of us can say that. So, that's a huge dream come true. And, just looking at my life, I'm so happily married to the most wonderful person on earth. And I have 2 sons who are strong and healthy and happy and intelligent and who don't think I'm crazy or flawed or anything. You know, I don't know too many kids that can grow up not thinking their parents are nut jobs. And my kids just love me and they love us and they're just great. And then just look at where I live. You know, I live on the beach in Carmel, California, and I am just, it's a dream life. It really is. And yeah, I just have to pinch myself.
What a wonderful success story and a happy point that you're in now. It really is wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing your story, and I truly appreciate you being so candid and sharing such intimate times of your life. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, René.
Thank you for having me.
And remember to scroll down the show notes where you'll find a link to Cynthiana's website and her social media. There's also a link to our Instagram and YouTube channel. And whilst you're on YouTube, don't forget to check out the videos we have there. We have bonus content of all our guests now on YouTube at the Art Podcast. Don't forget that's Art with 2 A's. You'll find not only all of the podcast, there's over 90 episodes of the 3 seasons that we've done already. And there's also video content of me talking to the guests after we've recorded the podcast. So you get a bit of bonus content and you get to see the artist. And whilst you're on your podcast app, please take a moment to share this episode with anyone you think might enjoy the show too. My thanks again to my guest this week, René Romero Schuler, and to you for listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time when my guest will be another creative woman from around the world of visual arts. So I do hope you'll join me then.